This is just the beginning.
I'm Ina Fried, Chief Technology Correspondent for Axios, and I'm excited to welcome you to whether you're joining us from Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, LinkedIn, or the Axios website, or our mobile app. Thank you for being here. I'm coming to you from my home in San Francisco, and welcome to the first in our series on the future of transportation and COVID-19. We're going to have 30 minutes where we dive into 3 different segments on the future of how people get around, both in the wake of COVID-19 and as we look forward to hopefully a more sustainable transit future. We'll look at how policymakers and companies are retooling public transit and other modes of transportation to be both safe and sustainable. We're going to continue this conversation throughout the Democratic and Republican national conventions, and I'd also like to thank our sponsor, Lyft, for making this possible. We encourage you to join the conversation using hashtag Axios Events or @Axios on Twitter. For our first segment, I'd like to welcome the mayor of Hoboken, Ravinder Bhalla, who's joining us from Hoboken, New Jersey. Welcome, Mayor.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. So obviously, everyone had plans and then COVID-19 hits. Talk a little bit about how Hoboken was approaching transit in general and what's shifted with COVID-19 and how that's affected the way that you plan for people getting around your city.
Sure. Well, Hoboken is we call it the mile square city. It's literally about 1.23 square miles. And so it also has a population of about 55,000 people. So we are the 5th most densely populated city in the country. So mobility and transportation in a densely populated city is critical. So we've been thinking about these issues even pre-COVID. We have test-driven e-scooters for a period of time in 2019. We have a bike share program currently. We are ramping up that bike share program to better technology, more efficient means of micromobility for that first and last mile. And that policy initiative has become all the more important in the context of COVID-19, where you face real health risks that are associated with what we're used to, which is mass transit. Hoboken has the highest population of residents who rely upon mass transit to commute to and from work every day in the country. So in the country, we have the highest population or percentage of residents who rely upon mass transit. That creates a real challenge for us, and we're looking at innovative ways to address those challenges.
Because in general, cities had been trying to build towards a future less reliant on cars. Obviously, as you mentioned, Hoboken has a very large percentage that were already reliant on mass trans. But then all of a sudden COVID hits, and the safest way everyone tells us is to get in your car. Now, that's not necessarily a reality for a lot of citizens in Hoboken who probably don't have cars to begin with. One of the things you mentioned that Hoboken did is really beef up the bike portion. And you had a city bike or a bike sharing alternative before, but it wasn't connected. One of the big steps you've taken recently is to connect with the system that's used in Jersey City and Manhattan. Why is that important?
Well, it's important because we want to make sure that there's connectivity between municipalities within our immediate radius. So we initially had a company that operated several years ago. They're still operating, but our neighbors to the south, Jersey City, and our neighbors just to the east, New York City, were utilizing the services of City Bike. And that created a disconnect between the product that we were using, which is Jersey Bike, branded as Jersey Bike, where you can ride your bike to Jersey City or get on a Jersey bike to Manhattan. But once you get there, you have City Bike at your disposal, which is a completely different product. There are membership fees associated with it. So we thought the most logical way to be more efficient and more service friendly towards our population was to create this connectivity, view these borders, these city borders, as really artificial, because it takes a 10-minute bike ride to get to New York City, or even a 5-minute or less bike ride to get to Jersey City. And it allows the user to use the same product. So if you want to commute to Jersey City, you can do so with a city bike, both to Jersey City and back. If you want to commute to New York City, you can do the same thing. And then when you get to New York City, you don't have to go on a subway and use mass transit. You can use a city bike in New York City as well. So that's why we thought, especially in the COVID-19 era, this was especially important.
And obviously, one of the components is how do you get people around safely for the moment, but make sure we still have the sustainable mass transit system we want for the future? How concerned are you that as ridership is down on a lot of these systems? I know in San Francisco, we've had major cuts to our public transit, probably less so, I'm guessing, in certainly in the Manhattan piece, but there's a real question of how do you sort of make sure that you're still building for the sustainable future you want while addressing the realities of the moment in terms of COVID. How have you looked at that, and what do cities like Hoboken need from the federal government in order to be able to keep their mass transit systems healthy and functional for the future, even if ridership is down at the moment?
Sure. Well, Hoboken has initiated perhaps the most aggressive Vision Zero plan in the country. We have aimed for a zero number of not deaths or fatalities, but the number zero injuries that are pedestrian related or bike related by the year 2030. So the initiation of that campaign, it takes, and the success of that campaign takes some work. And what we've done is essentially created a whole system of bike lanes within Hoboken. Right now, we're at about 40% of the streets in Hoboken, streets and roads, have bike lanes. We have three roads that have protected bike lanes, and we are progressing more towards bike lanes that are protected bike lanes in furtherance of that initiative of reliance upon bikes as an environmentally friendly alternative to driving, and also doing so with, as you'd mentioned, help from the federal government. That's through the annual grant program that they provide, as well as the state government here in New Jersey.
And when you talk about sort of mobility options and stuff, you mentioned earlier on that Hoboken had a trial with scooters and stuff. You've seemed to focus on bikes. What did you learn from the scooter experience, and what sort of made you put more eggs in the biking basket, if you will?
Well, the scooter experience, which I personally love, was very polarizing in the sense that everyone had a strong opinion. Some people had several opinions about e-scooters. So we had a pilot program, meaning a test program for the scooters that expired, and myself and the city council said we're going to press the pause button on scooters. We're not going to totally discount them, but we're going to revisit them at a later time. Right now, we're going to focus on City Bike, which includes not just traditional bikes, but also electric bikes. And then at some point in the future, we may transition or add e-bikes or e-scooters to that mix.
And we only have about 30 seconds left, but I did want to touch on one of the technologies for the future, which is autonomous vehicles, which obviously play into the safety issue that you're talking about. They also help seniors who can't drive. Where do you see autonomy fitting into this?
I was in Silicon Valley back in February. We visited a company called Zoox, Zoox. They're making an autonomous vehicle. I got to ride in one and see the technology behind it. They appear to be well advanced in that space, and it's something that we would welcome for a variety of reasons.
Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. We could talk much longer, but we covered a lot of ground, I hope. Thank you so much, Mayor Bhalla.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
So next up, we're going to have our View from the Top segment, which will include Axios' CEO, Jim Vandehei, speaking with Anthony Fox, the Chief Policy Officer from Lyft.
Thank you very much, Ina. It's now my pleasure to have a conversation with Anthony Fox, the former Secretary of Transportation and Chief Policy Officer at Lyft. Mr. Secretary and Chief, you're a busy man. You're in the middle of a policy dispute in California. Give us the Lyft perspective on what's happening in California and why this matters to our audience.
Well, thanks, Jim. What I can say is that the political forces in California are trying to end the flexibility that Lyft drivers want and force them into an employment model. We have had some breaking news in the last several hours, which is that a further stay has been granted in the litigation in California, which will allow rideshare to continue for now. But while we're able to continue for a brief time, it doesn't change the fact that our drivers do not want to be employees. And the reality, in fact, is that the vast majority of our workers do not want to be employees in California or elsewhere. We've polled them, we've asked them, and 71% prefer freedom of being independent contractors to the benefits of employment. 82% say they'd rather be an independent contractor than an employee. And 90% say that being an independent contractor is a good arrangement for their lifestyle. So we're focused on what our drivers want. What they really want is independence plus benefits. And that's what's included in our Proposition 22, which is on the November ballot in California. And it's what we think should be adopted throughout the country. And to your question about why this matters, it matters because policymakers are finding themselves with an old tool set that doesn't quite adapt to the 21st century. And what we need is a new toolbox, so to speak, so that we can make all work meaningful, whether it's employment or whether it is independent contracting. And this moment represents an opportunity to do that.
And what you're pushing for, and I believe Uber's pushed for a version of this, the idea is give these drivers additional money and let them decide what benefits they want, as opposed to the critics saying, well, if you're not an employee, then you're not getting health care. You're not getting other protections that an employee has in the state of California and other states. Is that correct?
That's exactly right. Work has changed tremendously over the last 5, 10, 20 years. Not all workers are working traditional 9-to-5 jobs. And frankly, many don't want to. Many don't want to have a boss. Many don't want to have to work in a shift. Many want to be able to work around their own lifestyle, their own schedule. And in reality, increasing numbers of people are working when and where and for however long they want. And I think we should all agree that this type of independence should be seen as a positive, and we should work towards creating a safety net or a benefit structure around that work that allows our system to focus more on the worker and less on the platform or the employer that's providing that work. That's what we're trying to unearth in California, providing a new way that allows people to earn how they want and have access to the benefits they need. That is the formulation: independence plus benefits.
Lyft's entire business model is giving people rides. Small part of your business is allowing people to use bikes through the Lyft system. Given that California isn't Rhode Island, it's like a nation state, right? You might not be able to do some business there. And then you have the coronavirus, which has curtailed driving throughout the country. Like, what is the state of Lyft, and how are you navigating these tumultuous times?
Yeah, it's a great question. Look, we've activated a lot of partnerships throughout the country. Frankly, more than 500 partnerships throughout the country, as we have all been dealing with this pandemic. And frankly, our business is not unlike the restaurant business or the overall travel industry. When people are worried about a public health crisis, they're less likely to use services like ours. And nevertheless, we have become part of the ecosystem that's standing up so much of what's underneath the average American. Trips to the grocery store, which we are supporting through these partnerships, trips to the pharmacy, or to get health care. We have worked a lot with some of the healthcare organizations in helping frontline workers who really are the heroes, helping them get safe and reliable transportation. And in April, we secured new partnerships with over a dozen health systems in the U.S., and that will enable us to help more than 10,000 essential workers across more than 160 hospitals and clinics get to and from work. It's not just healthcare workers, though. Students in this country who receive free and reduced lunch at school, and homebound seniors who have been heavily affected by the shelter-in-place advisories. We've done so much to try to help people in areas like the Bay Area find their way to get these essential things so that they can sustain themselves during this time. So we believe that what we do is important, and we've not been shy about offering that platform to improve the community good, and we think that's an essential part of what we're about as a company.
If I decided today that I want to supplement my income at Axios and join the gig economy, why would I choose to be a driver for Lyft as opposed to Uber? Like, what is the argument that you make to me, the driver?
Well, I think the main thing is that this is a platform that frankly, I think, as I've talked about, is one that doesn't just purport to help people get from one place to another, but we consider ourselves a part of the fabric of the communities in which we serve. And so many of the people who both use us as riders, but also who come to us as drivers, are attracted to not only the income earning opportunities, but also they feel good about being connected to a brand that is that sees itself as part of making communities better. And I'd say that among many things is one of the number one reasons why we see drivers coming to our platform.
Who gives me a bigger cut of the money, you or Uber?
Well, I know less about Uber's economics, but we feel very good about our relationship to our drivers. We recently actually did a study that was commissioned through it's an independent study commissioned through Cornell University Labor Center, and they actually had access to our information as well as Uber's information in Seattle, and they found that our drivers were making on average $23 an hour after expenses. And we believe that is emblematic of what is possible on this platform. So we feel like drivers get good at economics, but also when they're choosing, they choose us because they know this is a company that they trust the brand, and they know this brand is one that will deliver many more things to the community as a result of their efforts.
Anthony Fox, thank you for a fascinating conversation. Thank you to Lyft for making this broader discussion about mobility and transportation in the future possible. Back to you, Ina.
Thanks, Jim. Well, our next guest is the Congressman from North Carolina, Representative G.K. Butterfield, joining us live from Wilson, North Carolina. Thanks, Congressman.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
So we've talked a little already about how we have to balance with the pandemic what's safe in terms of transportation for the moment with still not foregoing what we want to build in terms of a more sustainable transportation future. And I'm curious in our conversation to also highlight what's safe and what's sustainable isn't always inherently what's equitable. And how important is it that as we're looking to the transportation of the future, we're building something that is an equitable future and hopefully a more equitable future than the one that we have today?
Well, first, let me thank you for bringing me on today and allowing me to share just a few words with our viewers all across the country. This is a very exciting moment. We've seen the convention this past week, and I'm very proud of what has played out before the American people, and we're just excited about the upcoming election. But let me tell you, when we look at policymaking, and I am now a senior member of Congress, having been there now for 16 years. I'm a chief deputy whip. I'm on the Energy and Commerce Committee. I can tell you that when I think about the top 5 issues that our country is facing at the moment, it's not only national security and homeland security, economic security, food insecurity, but it's also the future of transportation. If we're going to grow this economy, if we're going to face the challenges of the 21st century, we have to really, really sharpen our policymaking with respect to transportation. Not only do we need to improve our interstate highways and our other surface transportation modes, but we have to look at public transportation and autonomous vehicles and all of the other innovations of the 21st century. We have some great challenges, but we're going to face those challenges. Our federal picture our economic picture is not very good right now. The economy is going to recover. I suggest to you that in Q1 of 21, that sounds good. Q1 of 21, first quarter of 2021, I think we're going to see a resurgence of the economy. We're going to see some new leadership in Washington, and I think we're going to see transportation be in the forefront. We passed an infrastructure bill a few weeks ago. It's not going anywhere in the Republican Senate, nor is President Trump going to do anything to promote infrastructure. But I tell you that my party, the Democratic Party, is prepared to advance a $1.5 trillion infrastructure package, which will include innovations in transportation.
And when you look to things like autonomous vehicles, I mean, obviously the promise is huge. Fewer lives lost on the roads, seniors being able to be more independent. What are some of the things that you think are most important that doesn't get left out of the conversation? What do we need to be thinking about when it comes to things like autonomous vehicles?
Well, it begins with education. The American people are not fully informed about autonomous vehicles. That's something that is a new innovation. And so we've got to make sure that we wage a very comprehensive campaign to educate the American people what it is and what it is not. But autonomous vehicles are safe. It's the future of transportation. And I just want us in Congress to not denigrate this concept, but to go to the floor, go to the American people, go to our constituents from time to time, and fully explain the value of transportation and especially autonomous transportation. This is the future, and we as policymakers need to educate the American people. So that's where we begin. But also, we have to invest in our future. It's not going to happen automatically. It's going to take resources. It's going to take public-private partnerships in order to make that happen. But I can tell you, under the leadership of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, yes, Kamala Harris from Northern California, working with a Democratic Congress, we are ready to invest in transportation of the future. As we build highways now, we are talking about dig once. That means that we want to lay broadband cable, fiber along interstate highways so that we can deploy broadband to rural communities all across the country.
And you mentioned at the outset public transit. One of the impacts of the pandemic is cities and states, local transit agencies are really struggling. And, you know, I know in where I live in San Francisco and in Northern California, our metro rail, Caltrain, which links various communities, is under threat. There's been huge cuts to our city buses. And it strikes me that some of the people that need transportation the most right now are essential workers that are out there every day, have fewer and fewer options. How concerned are you that public transit is going to suffer in the wake of the pandemic?
Well, we're getting reports daily about the Metro Rail in Northern California. We are being told about the subway system in New York City. All of these mass transit systems are now underwater, and they are in need of immediate capital. And it's because of the pandemic. It's not ridership particularly. It is the pandemic that has caused a decrease in ridership. And so we have a bill pending right now in Congress. It has passed the House of Representatives. It's called the HEROES Act. In there, we invest $1 trillion in what we refer to as state and local support. We want to give money to states and to local communities, municipalities such as San Francisco and Oakland and other communities in the Bay Area. We want to invest in these communities to keep them from having to lay off first responders and fire and police personnel. We don't want them to have to raise property taxes and to do other things necessary in order to balance their budget. Our governmental units are underwater, and we need to force and demand that Republican senators and the president get on board with state and local support, because the bill is there waiting for passage.
What's the risk to our transportation future if we don't support states and local governments that fund these public transit agencies?
Oh, it's unthinkable. It's unthinkable. Transportation is so vitally important to a healthy economy. If we don't have a robust transportation system, then we're not going to have a robust economy. We don't have an economy that's robust. We're going to have people not working. We're going to see more unemployment. We're going to see companies begin to fail and to lay off dozens and dozens, if not hundreds of people. And so transportation is the engine. You know, people talk all the time about small businesses are the engine to a thriving economy. Let me add to that transportation. Without a sustainable transportation plan in place, we're not going to grow the economy, and America is not going to be what she can be.
And where do you see some of these newer transportation modes fitting in, whether it's ride sharing in cars or scooters and bike sharing programs? Where are some of these new modes fitting in alongside public transit and individual car ownership?
All of the above. All of the above. Let me tell you that they have a place in small communities as well as large communities. Ride share is the future. We talk about autonomous vehicles. We talk about micromobility. We talk about public transportation. But all of these modes must interact with each other. We need all of these modes available to the American people, not just in the large metro areas, but also in rural communities as well. The American people must be able to be mobile. They must be able to move around and commute to and from work. They need to be able to do it in a safe way and efficiently and quickly. And so these are the conversations that we must have. We cannot continue to ignore the challenge of transportation because it is the future.
And what's the civil rights component? You've been fighting for civil rights your whole career from before you entered politics. What is the civil rights component, the implication to equality of transportation? And you've talked a little bit about it in terms of being the gateway to jobs.
Well, when I was chairman of the Congressional Black Caucus several years ago, we launched a project called Tech 2020, which was specifically designed to get African Americans more involved, not only in the technology sector, but also in transportation and entertainment as well. And we reached out to several of the big companies there in California. And Lyft, for example, comes to my mind. We reached out to Lyft and challenged them to really do a deeper dive in diversity and inclusion within the company. And I'm so pleased with the response that we've received from Lyft and other companies. I think of technology companies up in Silicon. They are doing great things, not where they need to be, but certainly they've come a long way. And I'm very proud of Lyft and the other companies that have embraced the whole notion of diversity and inclusion. That is the future. We have African American students who are enrolled in HBCUs, and you're going to hear more about HBCUs now with Kamala Harris as our nominee for the Democratic Party. She's a product of an HBCU, Howard University. We're going to see much more conversation about HBCUs. And so we have the talent. We have the talent in the pipeline. There will be more in the pipeline. Other groups are trying to enhance the tech pipeline, the STEM pipeline, and you're going to see more African American workers, executives ready for placement. And that's why we need to have diversity from the top to the bottom. I like to say from the boardroom all the way down to vendors. Companies must be fully diverse. When you're diverse, you're more profitable.
Well, thank you so much, Congressman G.K. Butterfield, for taking the time and being part of this conversation. And thank all of you for joining us this afternoon for another conversation that I hope has made everyone get a little smarter, faster on a subject that's super important to our future. Obviously, as the congressman said, without transportation, we don't have a healthy economy and jobs. Also like to thank our sponsor, Lyft, for making this conversation possible. And if you enjoyed it, I hope you'll find other ways to access Axios, whether it's our new podcasts or our Axios on HBO show. And you can also sign up for newsletters, including Login, our tech newsletter, which I write. You can go to signup.axios.com. And if you enjoy these events, we're going to have more of them next week. We'll have 4 more events at 12:30 next week during the Republican National Convention, including our second Lyft event, which will be a week from today, next Friday, August 28th. Thanks. For Axios, I'm Ina Fried.